If I could go back in time and ask for forgiveness, I would do it. But every time I tried to approach her, she sent me away like dirt. My name is Alexandra, a young mother of 30 years, and I live in Cameroon. And in addition to my 2 children, aged 7 and 8, I just had a baby. Indeed, 3 months ago, I gave birth to a beautiful little girl that came to complete the duo that already colored my home. After the 3 months of maternity leave, I had to reorganize the return to work. Unfortunately, I had trouble finding a nanny, so I called a cousin of mine from the village to come and live with us. But the latter was slow to arrive, and I had to manage to accomplish even the most basic household chores while keeping an eye on the children. I know you would be wondering where my husband was. My husband has a job as a truck driver, which means that he is not always at home. So most of the time, I find myself alone with the children, and that requires a lot of organization and planning. And to lighten the load of work I have, I found a little trick that worked. When I found it necessary to go do shopping, I entrusted my kids to a neighbor who constantly was at home. I left her with the necessities for food, diapers, and changing clothes, and I came back when the shopping was over, knowing that my kids were safe and sound. So this Saturday, as usual, at around 10 a.m., I decided to go shopping for the week. We were starting to run out of milk and many other necessities. So I prepared a little bag for the kids and I quickly dropped them off at the neighbors. But that morning, I was in such a hurry that I couldn't prepare their favorite snack for them. And I told my neighbor, who told me that there was no problem because she had planned to make a pasta for her son and that the children were going to love it. Confident, I headed to the supermarket where I did my shopping with a lot of diligence and knowing that my kids were safe and free from starvation. Everything was going well until I received a call from my neighbor who seemed to be scared. She made me understand that my kids started to vomit and squirm in pain, whereas a few minutes ago everything was fine. Frightened, I ran towards the exit, hoping to get home as soon as possible so as to bring my babies to the hospital. Once I got to the scene, I found all 3 of them pale and in an alarming state. My first son, who used to be very talkative, couldn't even say a single word because he felt bad. All he could do was reach out to me and hold me tight into his arms, begging me to do something. My daughter, meanwhile, was in the bathroom and seemed to have been vomiting the whole of that time. I didn't even have time to ask questions, so I took my kids and headed straight to the emergency room in the hospital. And during the doctor's consultation, I was told that my kids were poisoned. But unfortunately, the doctor had not yet found what was the reason of the poisoning. It didn't even take long for me to return to my neighbor's house after the condition of my kids was stabilized, and I went to teach her a lesson. In my head, I directly made the connection between the word intoxication and the fact that my kids had spent part of their day at her house. Besides the fact that I knew for sure that she was going to make spaghetti. Even more curious, her son didn't suffer from the same illness while my children were on the verge of dying. All this evidence was just supporting my theory of poisoning. I didn't even hesitate to insult her copiously in front of the whole neighborhood without even giving her the chance to say a word. I dragged her through the mud while my neighbors looked at me with approving faces. I was so filled with rage that I spoke outrageous things, and in no time I took my phone and called the police to report my neighbor of attempted murder on my kids. In my deposition, I made it clear to the police officers that my neighbor was surely jealous of me because of the fact that I had a certain financial well-being that she didn't have. I also said that she was probably angry with me because while I was a wife who had a job and a husband who provided for us, she was just a housewife with a modest income. It wasn't long before the police raided our neighborhood to ascertain the facts and question the neighbors. All were formal on the fact that my children had spent the morning at the neighbor's house and that they had eaten food from her pot, and that curiously her son, who had eaten the same food, was in good health. This is how my neighbor was taken to the police station for questioning, and that she was taken into custody pending the doctor's final report. It was a rout. Her husband had returned from the trip he had made and found their son abandoned in their house When told the story, he instantly made his way to the police station where he inquired about the situation and took care to pay the wife's bills so that she could at least be free, pending the final verdict of the investigations. During this time, I continued to watch over my children who were still hospitalized. At least their vital signs were stable, but they were extremely weak and dehydrated. They were in good hands and the situation was improving. In the middle of this rumble, I had taken the care to contact a lawyer who was going to defend my case in court. I was determined to do this battle with my neighbor who had tried to end my kids' lives. So many poisoning stories had reached around town, and I was determined to send a strong message through the way I dealt with the supposed killer. It was amazing how wicked the world was becoming. A woman in whom I put all my trust allowed herself to take advantage of the vulnerability of innocent children to get at me. Unbelievable. Yet I gave her every financial support I could each time she presented me with a problem. Too good to stupid. That's how she was thanking me? 3 weeks later, my kids were completely recovered. We even already had returned home, but we had to go back to the hospital for a routine checkup. And this checkup fell the day before the first hearing against my neighbor in court. And it was during this medical consultation that my doctor made me understand that my children were simply victims of food poisoning and that it had nothing to do with any deliberate poisoning. I was shocked and skeptical at the same time. If it was because of food poisoning that my angels ended up in the hospital, why didn't my neighbor's son end up in the same situation either? And this is how he explained to me that through the stool examinations carried out on my kids, they had eaten spoiled meat. Meat? But my neighbor had sworn to me that she only made a dish of pasta. Where could the meat in question come from? I tried to replay the movie from the night before in my head, and that's how I found out that I had reheated meatballs from my freezer for dinner. It's true that these dumplings had spent almost 2 weeks in the freezer, but since I used to do this because of my busy schedule, I couldn't always make fresh meals. As the events of the day before that fateful day clarified in my head, I realized that the electric company during that week made several cuts. The meat must have decomposed a little. Oh my God, how clumsy! Not only did I put my own children's lives in danger because of my inability to prepare a new meal, but also I unfairly accused my neighbor who only wanted to help me. Now I found myself in an impasse. Not only did I have to apologize to my poor neighbor, I also had to withdraw my complaint. The next morning before it was too late, I called on my lawyer and explained the situation to him. He and I tried to organize a conciliation meeting with my neighbor and her husband, but it was too late. She was deeply hurt by the way I had treated her. In return, she instead sued me for defamation. Today, I can't even walk with my head held high in the neighborhood. I am so ashamed.